Good evening, everyone. Am I audible? If you could respond, am I audible?
Yes.
All right, thank you. I see someone's hand is raised, Mr. Sheikh Saji. Do you have a query?
Yeah. The last session I told you about the how what is the exam pattern and how it is done. What are
Yeah.
the
I actually asked the main course team, and they responded saying it will be only MCQs, only multiple choice questions will be there.
when will we expect to get hall ticket?
That is not in the hands of the team. So it's up to the NPTEL for people. So we really don't know. They had sent a mail saying we'll receive it shortly, but I don't think they've issued the hall tickets yet. So that's not really up to us. In fact, I think we have a deadline for sending in the assignment uh, changes also. If you remember, there are several questions where the answer key was wrong. That will also be done shortly, and the marks will be changed accordingly. So we don't know about the hall ticket issue.
And one last thing,
Yeah,
can we get different exam dates or the same dates will be for everyone?
I think there are. They'll try to keep it on Saturday and Sunday. So 29th and 30th is when it is going to be. But I'm not sure if there are too many candidates, then they might extend it to 28th also. But the allotment is going to be based on the NPTEL people. So if it is happening for a subject, usually they'll try to keep it on the same day. Yes.
Where can we download the previous year question paper?
That is something that I asked, and they said it's not available for the public. So in fact, ma'am, I spoke to ma'am also, and she said the best way is to go through the presentations and assignments to prepare for the examination. They said they cannot release the previous year's question
The
papers.
exam questions will be asked in only the given matter only, no.
Yes. Whatever has been provided in the presentations, in the lectures, that will be covered in the examination. That will be the full syllabus. And there'll
There
be
will be a
only,
no negative mark.
uh, I don't think so. They would have mentioned it. I hope not. This was not asked to me last time. So I can check and let you know. But I don't think there'll be negative marking. But there'll be only multiple choice questions. That much I'm sure about.
Thank you, Monica.
Yeah. Thank you. All right. If are there any other queries regarding the examination pattern or anything? If not, we'll go to the session. So two small announcements before we go into the yeah, into the session. One is that it's extremely hot here where I'm taking the lecture from. So I unfortunately do not have a room with a closed door. So in case there are any interruptions or there is any background noise, I'm extremely sorry. If it becomes unbearable that you cannot hear me, you can always let me know. So as of now, things are silent here. I hope it stays that way for 2 hours. But I really cannot close my door because I think I'll boil from the heat otherwise. So I hope you really don't mind. If there is some interruption, also I'll try to keep the interruptions to a minimum. But in case there are any, please bear with me. Uh, it's just the condition of things here. That's one thing. Secondly, The reason why I'm not switching on my video is because of slightly dicey internet connection. The moment I switch on my video, things go wrong on multiple ends. So I'm not able to connect through my phone to check the responses that are being given in the chat box, or something goes wrong. That's the reason. And I also think because we have the slides on constantly, I think it's kind of redundant for us to have the video on, and that's sort of why I'm not switching on my video. If probably during this discussion, if you still want to, have it on, you can have your video on. I wouldn't mind that. All right. So all this being said, let's go into the session. Sorry. Yeah. So good evening, everyone. For those of you who have also joined a little late. So we are in our 11th week of the live interaction session for the NPTEL course on environmental impact assessment. So the course instructor is Dr. Harshit Lakra. She is an assistant professor at the Department of Architecture and Planning at the Indian Institute of Technology, Roorkee. So we have two of these sessions, live interaction sessions per week. This is a joint collaboration between PMRF and NPTEL. So PMRF is the Prime Minister's Research Fellowship, where PhD candidates PhD candidates from select institutes, IITs, and a few other institutes from across the country are selected on the basis of merit, and we are eligible for a fellowship. But as part of the of as part of being selected for the fellowship, we're expected to do a bit of teaching outside our institute, apart from whatever internal teaching assistantship that we do. So NPTEL has given us this opportunity to fulfill that requirement by filling in for these interaction sessions. Uh, this is my second term during doing these interaction sessions, and they've been extremely helpful to me personally to in order to sort of hone my skills, taking classes, but also to get exposed to an entirely new course myself. I hope these sessions have been useful to you. So the two people who take these sessions, one session is on Saturdays. It's handled by Ms. Isha Rathore. She is a PMRF and research scholar at the Department of Architecture and Planning at the Indian Institute of Technology, Roorkee. The Tuesday sessions are handled by me. I'm Monica S. I'm a PMRF and research scholar at the Department of Architecture and Regional Planning at the Indian Institute of Technology, Kharagpur. So we have two main avenues of interaction in these NPTEL courses. So we have these sessions. Our sessions run every Tuesday from 6 p.m. to 8 p.m. So whenever you have a query, usually I prompt after a question or after a set of questions, after a few questions. But even otherwise, you can raise your hand on Google Meet. After I prompt you saying you can go ahead and ask your query, you can unmute and raise the query. Questions can also be posted in the chat box, right? So they'll be addressed in due course of time during the session itself. Excuse me. We also have a discussion forum for the course. So any questions related to the live sessions conducted can be raised there, and it will be addressed by me or Ms. Isha. But general questions regarding the content can also be raised there. They'll either be addressed in the forum itself or in the next week's live session. Right? So, an outline for this session, we will have a very short recap of what was taught in week 11. We'll basically go through the coverage or outline of each lecture. Then we'll be looking at week 11 assignment questions from the previous run of the course. That is the previous set of assignment questions. We'll discuss answers and see a few explanations. Then we will look at the current run of the course for week 11, like assignment questions, and answers will be discussed and explained. So for this week, the additional content is going to be slightly limited because most of them are again extremely direct and technical. Wherever I can, I'll provide additional explanation while I'm handling the discussion. But otherwise, the extra content that we've been seeing in the other weeks will be limited here. So just to keep you informed as to how the session is going to be. Sorry, I'm coughing. I have a bit of a sore throat. So pardon that, please. So recap of the week's course contents. So week 11 has been a continuation of the EIA methods. So lecture 51 dealt with EIA methods corresponding to land acquisition, resettlement, and livelihoods. Lecture 52 saw EIA methods related to resource efficiency, 53 on risk and risk assessment, lecture 54 on EIA methods corresponding to cumulative effects, and 55 on methods corresponding to environmental management plans. So these have been, a lot of these do not really belong to the conventional categories that we saw previously, right? When we saw air, water, land. So those methods were more focused on how are you going to determine the baseline, or how are you going to determine the scoping, what are the technical methods of measurement going to be. But here we are addressing these aspects such as land acquisition or cumulative effects, environmental management plans, because these are components that are essential, but they're not really addressed anywhere else, right? So that is the reason why. Uh, Hold on one second. Sorry for the interruption. So these aspects are things that you need to have like specific methods that address them. However, they're not really explicitly dealt with anywhere else. That's the reason why we have these specific lectures, right? So, in lecture 51, which was on land acquisition, resettlement, and livelihoods, we saw scoping and initial planning. We saw zones of project influence, profiling and baseline data collection, development of resettlement action plan, which is RAP, under which we saw risk management, RAP consultations and negotiations, compensation arrangements, site selection, design of resettlement housing. Then we saw implementation and handover, livelihood restoration and enhancement, monitoring and evaluation. In lecture 52, which was on resource efficiency, we saw the basic definitions and concepts of resource efficiency, such as life cycle assessment, energy and mass balance, closed loop systems, waste hierarchy, self sufficiency, and resilience, scoping and baseline studies, impact prediction and evaluation, mitigation, and resource efficiency indicators. In lecture 53, we saw risk and risk assessment and the methods in environmental impact assessment that are corresponding to doing this. We saw a few definitions and concepts, risk assessment and a broader risk management framework, prediction and evaluation, under which we saw outcomes of quantitative risk assessment, that is QRA, determining acceptable risk, and qualitative risk assessment. We also saw mitigation and quantitative risk assessment and environmental social impact assessment. In lecture 54, which was on cumulative effects and the EIA methods to in dealing with them, we saw definitions and concepts. We saw cumulative, additive, and synergistic effects, valued ecosystem components, cumulative effects mechanisms, and typology. Then we saw key legislation and guidance, overall methodology, scoping and baseline, prediction and evaluation, under which we saw the proximate cost test of significance and mitigation. In lecture 55, we saw environmental management plans, under which we saw a few definitions and concepts, key legislation, policy, and guidance, policies and standards set by international financial institutions and guidance, outline of methodology and the structure of environmental management plans, challenges associated with EMPs, and example of EMP for a particular project in Arunachal Pradesh, which was the Dembi Lower Hydroelectric Project. Before we move on to the assignment questions, are there any general queries regarding the week's content? All right, as usual, I would request you to kindly give your answers in the chat box so that we keep the session a little interactive. Don't worry about giving the wrong answer. It's more about recall and see if you can, recollect what you went through in the course content. And when, in case you have some kind of opposition or some kind of, confusion as to why this is the answer or why you thought some other option was the answer, kindly let me know and we can have a discussion regarding the same. So, question number one, match the project influence zones in context of EIA given in group one with their description in group two. So, we are looking at project influence zones in group one with their description in group two. So, we have in group one, we have primary zone and secondary zone. Any answers? You can give me partial answers as well. I mean, of course, here there are only two options. In any of the match the following questions, you can give me partial answers, right? Okay, we have a couple of answers. Anybody else? Okay, so let's see what our options are. In group two, the first one is zone of direct impact areas where the project activities and facilities are located, including access routes, water and power supply networks, supply chains, employee accommodation. So this is the zone of direct impact. That would be our primary zone, right? And the second option is larger region in which the project, so larger region in which the project is located, and that will encounter the main economic impacts from the project, including the influx of economic migrants as well as employment and business opportunities. So that will be the second option. So the thing is, the key aspect to notice in this is including access routes, water and power supply networks, supply chains, and employee accommodation. So, say you have your project here, say you have a township that you have developed, right? And the closest main city is this one. Say, in order to ensure this connectivity, proper connectivity of this development that you've made, say you develop road networks, right? Will that be a part of the larger region? It is happening in the larger region, yes, but this access route is directly connected with this project's development, right? So, say because of this township has developed, some other settlement has started come up here, and some other settlement has come up here, right? And this is sort of dependent or is the consequence of this our project that is being developed, and then you develop road networks for this, those will be part of the secondary zone, right? However, the primary access road network will still be part of the primary zone, right? So this is the slide dealing with these two options, right? Two terms rather. These are part of the zones of project influence. So if you remember, when we look at scoping land acquisition and resettlement, this is one of the aspects that will determine as part of scoping. So for the primary zone, we have it is the zone of direct impact and areas where the project activities and facilities are located, right? And so on and so forth. And secondary zone is the larger region. Okay? So here, say some economic migrants come in, some employment and business opportunities come in. All of these are the secondary zone. Right? So the answer is A. Any queries? Okay. Moving on to the next question. Match the components of a standard resettlement action plan. We are looking at a resettlement action plan given in group 1 with their description in group 2. So we have four components that are listed here. One is livelihood restoration, Q is schedule, R baseline studies, and S eligibility and valuation of losses and compensation entitlements. Any answers? You can also give me partial answers, say P1. Okay, so is there a query? I see a raised hand. Is there a query? Mr. Yogendra Nagar, you've raised your hand. Is there a query? All right. So if there is, kindly post it in the chat box if you're not able to unmute. Yes. All right. All right. There is no problem. You don't have to raise your hand for answering, so don't worry about it. So, all right. So we have one answer. Anybody else? All right. So let's look at the options we have. First one, in Group 2, covering all resettlement activities from preparation through implementation and how resettlement is linked to the implementation of the overall project. So this one would be our schedule. Right? So this schedule is actually a schedule of tasks or activities or whatever is going to be done. So that's why it's called a schedule. Right? So all the resettlement activities are here. Even if this is ambiguous, if you match all the rest, then this will become very apparent, right? So the second one, summary of studies undertaken, including census surveys, socioeconomic studies, key people interview, focus groups, etc. So this will be part of the baseline studies, right? So baseline studies are conducted to establish the current state of the environment or the project area and its, you know, probably the influence zone also, right? It need not be just, if you recall, it need not be just the current state. It would also be if the project is not really constructed or implemented, then the future state of the environment, that is, as is state of the environment, is also part of the baseline studies. So we'll have a lot of primary and secondary data feeding into these studies. That'll be part of baseline studies. Then the third one, the methodology used to value losses under local laws and supplementary measures needed to achieve full replacement costs. So here this is, sorry, S, eligibility and valuation of losses and compensation environments. Right? And fourth, measures to improve and restore livelihoods of displaced people would be livelihood restoration. So we have P4, Q1, R3, and R2 and S3. That will be D. Right? So this is the slide showing the list of components of a standard resettlement action plan. So whenever you give this action plan, so a resettlement action plan is literally a plan for action, right? How are you going to actually resettle? What are the things that you're going to do? What are the things that you're going to consider, right? And how did you arrive at these conclusions? How did you decide this is what you're going to do? So in this, you have project description, potential impacts of the project, legal and institutional framework, under which or within which your this project is situated, baseline studies, stakeholder engagement, eligibility and valuation of losses and compensation entitlements, livelihood restoration, housing infrastructure and social services, organizational responsibilities. After we see all of these, we determine the schedule, if you remember. So based on all of these, what are you actually going to do? Right? That will be schedule. Then budget and monitoring, evaluation and reporting. So these are the components which are present in a standard RAP. Some reports might end up missing some of these, although missing elements are usually very rare. Most reports cover most of these. In fact, there might be additional components, right? Sorry. So the answer is B. Any queries? All right. Moving on to the next question. The extent of resettlement impacts depends on the following: magnitude of the displacement, characteristics of the project and its mitigation measures, characteristics of the community, all of the above. Any responses? So we are looking at how much the resettlement impact is going to be. So we have four options. A is 1 and 2 only, B 1 and 3 only, C 2 and 3 only, and D 4. That is all of the above. So we have one answer. Anybody else? Okay, we have two answers. Okay, we have anybody else? Okay, we have two answers, and both of you are absolutely right. So whenever you look at, so this is a slide that looks at, you know, the extent of resettlement impacts depend on the following aspects. One is the magnitude of the displacement. So are you displacing 10 families or are you displacing 100 families? Or is it going to be 500 families? So if it's just 10 families, and when you look at extent of resettlement impact, the resettlement impact will be both on people are who are being displaced. So say you're taking away 10 families from a place, so that 10 families will suffer, and you're going to resettle them into some other place, right? So that place will also have an impact. So if it's just 10 families, if you take them to a new area, then maybe the impact will not be as big as say you bringing in 100 families, right? So the power of, for example, the smallest example is the power of these resettled people to change the local character of the area. If it's just 10 families, it's lesser. They might end up being assimilated, or they might, the the character of the area is not as affected as say bringing in 100 families. When you bring in 100 families, that culture sort of starts dominating in the scenario. Like in a normal residential neighborhood, the addition of 100 families is huge, right? So it might end up impacting, for example, like the smallest example is crime levels, right? It's not that these families who are being brought in are all, crime prone. No, that's not the case. What happens is, it so happens that so often you end up taking them away from their original place of residence, means that they have lost their livelihood opportunities, right? They might have been rooted in that place, they might have been heavily dependent on some aspect in their old area which provided them their livelihood, and right now, then they've been uprooted, they've been brought to a new area. And if it's a big enough group of people, they can actually resort to, for example, say crime, in order to keep their sustenance going, right? So that's not unusual. And that is the difference between the magnitude, right? Then it also depends on the characteristics of the project, right? How much resettlement is going to happen. If it's a small project, if it's a big project, certain projects might end up actually accommodating people, and therefore might not actually, make such a big impact. Say some certain other projects, even if they take a small patch of land, they might have adverse impacts on the, surrounding area, in terms of, or they might require land not for the project itself but as a buffer area. Say it's a defense project, right? So then that will determine the extent of resettlement impact. We also have, is somebody unmuted? Kindly mute yourself. So then we have mitigation measures. What are the types of mitigation measures that are being planned as part of the project, right? And then we also have characteristics of the community, right? What kind of community is it? Is it a very adaptable community who are very enterprising, whose livelihoods are not rooted? Somebody is unmuted. Could you please mute yourself? I'll just go ahead and. So, what kind of community is it? Is it a community that has their livelihoods deeply rooted in the place, or is it an enterprising community? Then that makes the difference, right? So the answer is D. Moving on to the next question. Match the following terms of group A with their description in group B. So we have four terms in group A: resource efficiency, closed loop systems, energy balance, and mass balance. Any answers? You can also give me partial answers. Okay, we have one answer. Anybody else? Okay, let's see what the answers are. So let's go from below. The fourth option, sum of energy going into a system must equal to sum of energy going out of it plus any changes in the composition of that system. So that will be our energy balance. So, yeah, that will be R. So then we have third option is sum of mass going into a system must equal the sum of mass going out or being stored in the system. So that will be our mass balance. Then we have the second one, measure of the inputs and waste generated in the proposed development at every phase. So this is the measure of inputs and waste. So that will be resource efficiency. So only if you keep measure can you ensure resource efficiency. That's sort of the logic. Then where a waste product can be used as a resource either in the same process or elsewhere. So that will be closed loop systems. So this is these are the slides. For resource efficiency, we look at the measure of the inputs required in the process proposed development at every phase and measure of waste generated in the proposed development at every phase. Then for energy and mass balance, like we saw, so we call it conservation of energy and conservation of mass, right? If you remember, we also have these mass balance equations that we read in chemistry. Right? Then a closed loop system is where a waste product can be used as a resource either in the same process or elsewhere. Resource, like essentially these increase resource efficiency, right? So most of these resources, no system is actually completely a closed loop system uh, in nature, like or in the environment, right? Uh, because these systems are usually interdependent and they sort of feed into each other. In artificial systems, of course, it's definitely possible to have a closed loop system. Nonetheless, there is at least a minimal level of waste that is generated in these systems, right? So practically, we most of the time when we can reuse the waste product within the system, almost all of it, then yeah, that's consider that a closed loop system. Right? So here the answer is C. P2, Q1, R4, and S3. Right. So let's take a closer look. So if you remember, this is a closed loop production system, right? It's not a natural system. In this production system, you can see how you have these production, packaging, and distribution, use and maintenance. Then there is waste coming from this. We are minimizing the waste. So recovery is when you there is waste and then you minimize the amount of we try to take the waste and then reuse it or recycle it or process it somehow like remanufacture it, right? Then even in this process, this could become a cycle. There might be some waste coming out of this as well. Then we try to recover it again. Right? Then we end up getting when we recycle, we end up getting material sources, right? And we also try to minimize how much material is being taken into the production system as well by increasing the efficiency. So, however, even though this is a closed loop system, we do see this waste minimal waste that goes into the natural environment, right? So that's just to illustrate how a closed loop system works. Then this is a chemical system example of a mass balance uh, situation. So this this is a pyrolysis process. Within the process, whatever mass comes in will end up, you know, being either retained in the system or it goes out of the system. So the overall net mass in the system coming in and going out will all plus, of course, whatever is staying will be the same. So whatever comes in has to either stay or go out. It can't disappear somewhere or we can't create mass. So that's a mass balance system. So this is in the context of a chemical system that applies in general to environmental systems as well. In fact, there is this mass balance system model and mass balance system approach towards resource efficiency that is also in practice. I'm not going into the details of it. You can check it out if you are interested. This is an energy balance example, again, not from a normal, like an environmental system. We are looking at a very specific example, but the concept still applies, right? So you bring in energy from some input. There is some sort of energy conversion, say, uh, then you have some sort of electric output here in the system, but some ends up being wasted also, right? So in any machine, not all incoming energy is converted into, outgoing energy. Say you have some, uh, the most basic example is a lamp in your house, right? So take a tungsten lamp, for example. If you touch a tungsten lamp, you'll see how hot it gets. The thing is, the electric energy that is coming in, it's getting converted into, of course, light energy, but also as heat energy. So that's the issue with mechanical systems. There is always a wastage of energy. There's not pure conversion of energy. That level of efficiency has not been attained, right? But at the end of the day, if you add the light energy and heat energy, it will be equal to the incoming electric energy, right? So that's the energy balance that we're talking about. Are there any queries? I hope that's clear, right? Moving on to the next question. Select the correct order as per the waste hierarchy. So we have four options. Option A involves reduction of the amount of waste produced, then reuse of materials, recycling of materials into new products, recovery of energy from waste, and then landfill of any remaining waste. In option B, we see reduction of the amount of waste produced, recycling of materials into new products, reuse of materials, recovery of energy from waste, and then landfill. In C, we see reduction, reuse, recycling, landfill, and then recovery. Then option D has reuse, recycling, recovery, landfill, and reduction. Any responses? So most of these go from what is the most preferred to the least preferred, right? So you start from the best strategy to the worst strategy towards handling waste. Okay, we have one answer. Anybody else? All right. So let's look at the waste hierarchy. So when you look at a hierarchy, uh, like so this is not represented the right way. I think I have a better graphic. So in this waste hierarchy, I'll explain it later. So you first see reduction of the amount of waste produced, then reuse of materials, then recycling of materials into new products, recovery of energy from waste, and then landfill of any remaining waste. So the answer is A. So you are right, sir. Right? The answer is A. So when you look at the waste hierarchy, right? So we look at the first one when you avoid or reduce. We reduce total waste created in the first place. This is the most preferred, right? So you have very little energy that's going in. It has the highest, uh, rather it has the when they mean highest impact, I think they mean highest good impact, not negative, positive impact, right? When you avoid waste at all, then you look at reuse. right? Whenever you can reuse some material, then that's the second preferred means. Then we see recycle. So why is recycle preferred more than reuse? There is some amount of energy that you need to recycle, that is reprocess something into a new product, right? Recycling is when you have to reprocess it and make it into a new product, or a like a another product that has been reconfigured, right? So when you see this, that consumes more energy than just mere reuse, right? So when you take a say tin bottle, and then you go ahead and make a planter out of it, you're technically reusing it, right? There is not much reprocessing. But when you reprocess tin cans into another, like when you, even if you want to make a tin can again, like you need to recycle it, make it go through a process, and then remanufacture it into tin. So that takes up more energy. And the next one would be recovery of energy from waste, right? Where you sort of, I think somebody's unmuted again. Yeah. So where you sort of, try to draw energy, say you combustion or some sort of processing of this waste to create energy. The last resort is to just dispose it off in a landfill. Right? So that's the hierarchy of waste. Right? I hope that's clear. Any queries? Moving on to the next question. Match the following terms of group A with their description in group B. So we have four terms in group A: risk, hazard, chronic hazards, and hazardous events. And we have four descriptions. Any responses? You can also give me partial answers. All right. We have a couple of answers, so let's see what the answer is. Right? So the first option, an event where humans or other species are exposed to a hazard at high levels, right? Hazard at high levels, and harm to humans or the environment occurs very quickly. So this would be a hazardous event. So mind you, a hazardous event is also an acute hazard. I think the term has not been mentioned explicitly in the slides, but acute is when something happens in a very short span of time. Chronic is when it happens over a prolonged, very long period of time, long duration, right? So this one where it's happening very quickly and it's a very high level hazard with high level of harm to humans, that will be a hazardous event, right? So the second option, hazards that cause harm over a period of time. So here we see cause harm over a period of time through long-term exposure, typically include toxic chemicals and low-level radioactive material, right? So this one is chronic hazard, like I just said. Chronic is when something, even in illness, even in health, we talk about acute illnesses and chronic illnesses. So when you say you have fever or you have an infection that like you take antibiotics for a week or something, so that is an acute illness, right? So you're sick for a week and then done. But say you have diabetes or some sort of ache or pain or some back pain. Say people often live with that for years. So that's a chronic pain, right? A chronic illness. So the management for these two will be very different, right? And then the third one, inherent property of an object to create damage to humans or the environment. So there is an object and it has the potential to create damage. So that is a hazard. Its presence does not guarantee that there will be a hazard, right? There will be damage. Say there is a nuclear plant. That in itself, that's a hazard. It has the potential. If there is some sort of leak or some sort of explosion at that site, it's going to be disastrous. Yes, but its presence is only a potential for disaster. It's not the disaster itself, right? So that's a hazard. Then we see outcome of hazard or hazardous events is risk. So because these are there, we have some sort of risk for damage, right? So the answer is P4, Q3, R2, and S1, right? So the answer is D. So for us answered that, you're right. So these are the slides pertaining to the answers. Risk is how it is an outcome of hazards or hazardous events, right? It's the inherent hazard is given here as well. It's the inherent property of an object to create damage to humans or the environment. Then within hazards, we have chronic hazard where objects cause harm to humans by extended exposure, but at relatively low levels, usually. Right? And then we have acute hazards, which are like these hazardous events, where humans or other species are exposed to a hazard at high levels and harm to humans or the environment occurs very quickly. Right? So the answer is D, like I said. So this is just to illustrate the difference between hazard and risk. So a hazard is something that has the potential to harm you. Say the presence of a shark in the sea. That doesn't mean you're already harmed. But risk is the likelihood of a hazard causing a harm. Like what is the probability that you'll get attacked by a shark? So that's risk. So in fact here just another representation. A hazard is anything that can cause injury, illness, property damage, or loss of material. Risk is the probability and severity of a worker being harmed by the hazard. Like this is in context of some sort of labor situation, but in general, I think you get the concept, right? So, in fact, the term risk, this is a conceptual framework that has been proposed in a um, research paper, but it's a very, sorry, it's a very common framework, right? So, risk is related to three different aspects. One is hazard, uh, that is that an object is there with potential to harm. Then exposure. So uh, how much are people going to be exposed, right? So say you're going, like there are two parties going to the beach, like that's another very rudimentary example. There is the hazard would be getting a sunburn or something. But when you're prepared, say you're carrying umbrellas or you're carrying you're wearing sunscreen, that party is going to be not exposed, right? Even though the hazard is there, but the other party, if they're not carrying some sort of shield, then they're going to be exposed. So the level of exposure. Then vulnerability. Some groups are automatically more vulnerable. Say if there is somebody who can save themselves or somebody with a lesser propensity for a particular to be affected by a particular hazard, then they're less vulnerable. So these three terms come into the picture when we're talking about risk. Right. Are there any queries? All right. Moving on to the next question. The process of evaluating and assigning a numerical value to the risk associated with an industry, which also includes the practices of probabilistic safety assessment and probabilistic risk analysis, is called A. Quantitative risk assessment, or B. Qualitative risk assessment. Sorry. Any answers? Okay, let's. Okay, we have a couple of answers, and both of you are right. So, a quantitative risk assessment is, I mean, in general, numerical is probably not the best definition, but that's an easy way of looking at it. It's not just about assigning a value, but also in analysis. When you use quantitative procedures, quantitative analysis, so that would come under quantitative risk assessment. Whereas this is an example of a qualitative risk assessment. When you give some, relative answers or a very qualitative assessment of things, then that's qualitative risk assessment. The answer is A. Are there any queries? All right. We'll look at one more question and then we'll go for a short break. Right. So moving on to question number 8. The region between lower tolerable limit and the upper tolerable limit, risk in between the two values, is known as A. ALARP region, B. LARPA region, C. RAALP region, or D. LAARP region. So we're talking about this region, right? This region. So above which it's unacceptable risk, and below which it is acceptable risk. Any any answer? Okay, we have one answer. Anybody else? Okay, we have a couple of answers, but let's see what the answer is. So the answer is actually ALARP, right? So in for any in a framework for tolerability, like how much risk can you tolerate, there is always an unacceptable region, right? Where risk cannot be justified except in extraordinary circumstances. All right. Then there is a broadly acceptable region, right? So there is a low risk. So like mostly like almost the absence of risk or very low risk. So within this, whenever we are going for some sort of intervention, right? Yeah, some sort of mm, development or any intervention for that matter. The thing is, there is going to be to keep the risk as low as possible. It's not just about risk, but there is also going to be a cost component to it, right? So I think I have an explanation further down. So let's see the answer here. The answer is ALARP. So ALARP is actually a short form for as low as reasonably practicable, or as low as reasonably possible. So both are acceptable. So that's as low as reasonably possible. Impossible is easier to remember, but practicable is the easier answer, right? I hope that answers the query in the chat box also. So here you can see as low as reasonably practicable. So the thing is, whenever you have a project, there is, if you want to like lower your cost, you cannot lower it beyond a point, right? You cannot lower your cost so much that it becomes extremely dangerous, extremely risky to have that project at all. You can't do that. But at the same time, you can't make it so low risk that the cost is incredibly high. Like you can't spend too much on the project either. So what you do is you try to keep it within this region, and you try to keep the risk as low as reasonably possible, right? So I hope that explains the concept. Any queries? All right. Before we move on to the next question, let's take a short break. Let's let's meet around 7 7 6 on my system right now. 7 11, 7 7 right now. Yeah, 7 12. Like a 5 minute break. Let's just take a 5 minute break. All right, welcome back. I hope most of you have joined back. I hope I'm audible. Am I audible? Am I audible? Can somebody respond, please?
Hello.
Yes, sir. Am I audible?
Hello.
Hello.
Yeah, ma'am. Yes.
All right. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you
Hello,
so
ma'am.
much.
You are audible.
Thank you. So there's response in the chat box also. Thank you, sir. Thank you. All right. So coming back to the session, question number 9. Match the following terms of group A with their description in group B. So we have two terms, additive effects and synergistic effects. And we have a couple of examples. Any answers? I actually have one answer if I'm not wrong. Somebody had already responded. Okay, we have a couple of answers. Let's see what the slide content is. Right. So additive effects, it's the sum of the magnitudes of the same effect usually. Right, and the combined effect is assessed as if resulting from a single project. So say there are two different sources of noise. Sorry. So then sort of add them. Right. However, synergistic effects are difficult to recognize and complex to assess, as they can arise from the combination of different effects. For example, noise plus visual. And as the effects can be intra, as in occurring within one project or program or plan, or inter, as in occurring due to different projects or programs or plans. So here we have noise plus visual would be synergistic effects, and noise plus noise, because they're sort of the same type of effect, then we have additive effects. Right? So the answer is B. So this is a picture. Sorry that the image is not so clear, but I think I'll explain. So here we have, let's see. So we have one project, and then they start throwing in nutrients, right? So the effluent is small. You have algal bloom because of the effluents, and then some things die. There is some sort of deposit that happens. But when there are more industries, right, and it sort of crosses a threshold, then what happens is a dead zone gets created, right? So it sort of becomes an irreversible dead zone. Okay. However, so this is only with respect to say increase in the number of factories, right? However, say we see this in terms of increasing temperatures because of global warming, right? Or there is a different kind of factory that comes in. Say these two are different effects, right? So and they start this factory starts giving hot water into the system, like the heated water increases the temperature of the system. What happens is the dead zone increases. So this wouldn't have happened if it's the same type of factories coming on the other side of the shore, or like increasing across the area. Sorry. So then this might not have happened. But because we have this heated water plus nutrients coming into play, then probably the combined effect is different. Right? So that's additive versus synergistic effects. Another example is given here. So they're talking about how this is talking about a fish uh, community of fishes population. So one where there is an unperturbed population, so unaffected population. So then there is climate change happening, and then fishing happening, right? So say you're not looking at, if you can look at the, read the text here, the effect of fixed quota fishing, pressure, right? So fixed quota fishing is you cannot fish beyond a point, and monotonic climate change, assuming no fishing, right? So what happens is either you say fixed quota fishing without assuming constant environmental change, so no climate change and only fishing, or only fishing with no climate change. So some sort of additive effect. More population is lost with climate change, or say you increase fishing, then that is lost. That's just additive effect from one single component. But because of both climate change and the loss of population with fishing, so either what might happen is you might end up changing the threshold of the population like so much through fishing that they cannot fight against climate change, right? So it's both climate change and fishing. So maybe say there are 100 fish and then you reduce it to 10 fish and say 10 fish is the threshold, and somehow it stays at 10 fish. If there is no climate change, there is still a possibility they might grow back, right? But however, it comes down to 10, and with the effect of climate change ensures that these two working together, they can never grow back. So we might end up losing the entire population of fish. So that's sort of to give an example in a different context, right? Moving on to the next question. The proximate cause test of significance for effect prediction for performing a defensible cumulative effects assessment, or CEA, includes the following. So A, determining whether a proposal would proximately cause a significant effect on a given resource. B, investigating how the affected environment has, so here the first one is determine, second is investigate, right? Investigating how the affected environment has reached its current condition and projected trajectory as a result of the aggregate effects of past actions, defining an appropriate spatial and temporal scale for the impact assessment, right? And then we see determining what happens to the condition and trend of this resource if no action is taken, including effects of other present and reasonably foreseeable future actions, and what happens to this maintained or altered trend if the proposed or alternative actions are taken, and D, all of the above. Any answers? Okay, so the thing with this proximate cause test of significance, when the slide was shown in the lecture, it had just 3 words in it. However, if you download the PDF, the full explanation is given. So we have one answer, and you are right, sir. It is all of the above. So this is from the PDF. So the lecture does not have this slide, as in the lecture video does not have this slide. So please be conscious of this, right? So this is the content, the three-phase procedure for performing a defensible CEA. This is called the proximate cause test of significance. Right? So the answer is D, all of the above. Moving on to the next question. Match the following terms of group A with the description given in group B. So we have 4 terms: cumulative impacts, valued component, indirect impacts, impact interactions. Any answers? You can give me partial answers as well. Okay. We have one partial answer. Anybody else? Okay, another partial answer, and then another complete answer. All right, let's see what the answer is, right? So, looking at the first one in group B, the reactions between impacts, whether between the impacts of just one project or between the impacts of other projects in the areas, right? So, the reaction between impacts. This would be impact interactions. We are talking about how different impacts from either from the same project or from different projects will interact with each other, right? How they'll react with each other. So S1 is right, sir. Um, yeah. So the second option, impacts that arise from the successive, incremental, and or combined effects of an action, project, or activity when added to other existing planned and or reasonably anticipated future ones. So that will be cumulative impacts, if you remember. So we are looking at, okay, you're going to make a project in the site, that's fine, but we should see it in light of projects that have already been done, either recently or they're planned or like foreseeable projects. Somebody's unmuted. Okay, right. Sorry. So that will be cumulative impacts. The third one, environmental features that may be affected by a project that have been identified to be of concern by the proponents, government agencies, aboriginal peoples, or the public. Like somebody who's a stakeholder in the project, somebody who's related to the project, like or some sort of stakeholder in that area to that area, they have valued some feature or some component of the environment. So that will be valued component, right? So it's Q is 3, and then I think we have one more partial answer, right? Yeah. So then impacts on the environment which are not a direct result of the project, often produced away from or as a result of a complex pathway. So they are not a direct result. So that will be indirect result. So R4 is also correct, sir. So we have P2, Q3, R4, and S1. I think that's B. So these are the slides that deal with these. So indirect impact. So here the image is actually badly labeled. They mean the entire thing is about indirect impacts. But here impact B is the indirect impact. It's not impact A. Okay? So like it's not the direct impact, it's like a third level or a next level impact that happens. Right? Cumulative impact is when you have several uh, impacts coming in and they sort of become, like snowball into a bigger impact. Then we have impact interactions. So you have two different impacts and then they somehow interact or react with each other to create a new impact. So they might not create a new impact also. They might end up nullifying each other also. So that could also be an impact, right? And the next one is valued component. So environmental features that may be affected by a project and that have been identified to be of concern. So it's not just about being affected. So if nobody cares about something and it's not actually essential, then that doesn't matter. But if it's an aspect that is of concern, then it is a valued component. So the answer is B. Moving on to the next question. Which of the documents sets out the actions needed to manage environmental and social effects associated with the construction and operation of a development? So we are looking at a document which gives the actions needed to manage environmental and social effects which are associated with the construction and operation of a development. Any answers? We have a couple of answers. Okay, so this is environmental management plan, right? It's not ESMP, but here it talks about how environmental management plan gives some measures to be taken during the implementation and operation of a project to eliminate or offset adverse environmental impacts, right? Talking about environmental impacts here. The question talks about environmental and social effects. So the answer is environmental and social management plans. So ma'am actually talks about this during the lecture, if you recall. So the answer is A. So you are right, sir. Moving on to the next question. Key principles for successful environmental and social management plans, ESMPs, include the following: contractual agreement, cost of the mitigation actions and implementation of the ESMP, involvement of competent environmental professionals, and identification of key documents or references. So we have four options: A 1, 2, and 3 only, B 2 and 3 only, C 1, 2, and 4 only, and D 1, 2, 3, and 4. We have one answer. Anybody else? All right. So this slide talks about the structure of an EMP and the methodology, outline methodology. So these are the components basically: contractual agreement, competent environmental professionals, collaboration with stakeholders, right? So on and so forth. So the answer is D. Okay. Moving on to the next question. Identify the challenges in using environmental and social management plans, ESMPs. So this is actually not like it's not given in a slide, but ma'am sort of talks about it again. So we have four aspects given: need for environmental management responsiveness. Second one is system to manage environmental impacts with careful monitoring of contact requirements. Three, periodic evaluation of environmental performance measures. And four, all of the above. So is it one and two only, one and three only, one, two, and three only? Or, okay, so technically, these two answers are the same, right? So, and any answers? Okay, so we have one answer, and you are right, sir. So she talks about it. The answer key originally gave us just four, but it's essentially both. She talks about responsiveness, governance, and then how there has to be monitoring, and there has to be a system for monitoring, and how there has to be a system for evaluation. Right? So all of these are challenges in using environmental and social management plans. So these are the parts where things go wrong. Right? Okay. Moving on to the next question. Environmental management plans (EMPs) are listed in the World Bank's OP 4.01 as an instrument for compliance with the bank's environmental assessment requirements. Is it true or false? Any responses? We have one answer. Anybody else? You are right, sir. So this is Operation Manual 4.01, and they have given environmental management plan, right? It is an instrument for compliance with the bank's environmental assessment requirements, right? So the answer is true. All right, so there is no question 16, sorry. So before we move on to the uh, current assignment questions from for week 11, any queries regarding any of the questions, any of the answers, any of the explanations?
How is social and environment impact assessment is different from environmental impact assessment?
So environment impact assessment can be seen as a broader term. So it's a matter of how they are defined. We are defining the terminology, right? So generally, what happens is people talk about environmental impact assessment, and then what ended up happening was people started focusing only on the environment, right? However, there are groups of people who also said, no, no, environment includes the people within it, right? So these schools of thought sort of came up with this term environmental and social impact assessment. But ideally, any type of EIA should be an ESIA, right? So you might end up having a project, and then the people might choose to do only environment assessment, right? Excluding the social part. But that's a narrow view of looking at it. The broader view is the environmental and social impact assessment. So that's why a lot of agencies have started specifying. Like, I'm not going to leave it to you because you are ignoring the social part. So let me go ahead and say environmental and social impact assessment. So it's just a matter of terminology. I hope that clears your query.
Yes, this is clear. And we have discussed about the chronic and chronic risk and
Chronic hazard
the
and acute
hazard.
hazard. Yeah.
So means you want to say that suppose there is a normally what we in a general terms that when we say environment impact assessment, we talk about only pollutions and all this.
Mm.
So, so you any report on EIA must include about the diseases which are going to be generated because of these activities, maybe the construction activity, maybe the operational activity. So
Yeah.
we also include the chronic part also in every EIA report. Am I clear?
Technically, the at the acute part also. I will. Should I give you an example?
Yes.
Say you're doing development in a hilly area, right? A landslide is a very, very important acute hazard that you should be cognizant of. You can't say, oh, I'll build it, no, no, landslide won't happen, right? You're supposed to do an assessment of how much is the probability of a landslide if I do construction here. So that's one thing. Or in the case of a chronic, say you're building a factory and there is some sort of emission coming out, then people might develop respiratory diseases like over time if the pollution level is beyond a threshold. So these both of them have to be included. Yeah,
Thank
I
you.
hope. Yeah, yeah.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, so moving on to the current runs assignment questions.
Example of additive impact assessment.
Your voice is getting cut, sir. Okay. Is there a query, sir?
Additive risk. Yes, I'm just asking because I'm doing some projects which includes environment impact assessment. So,
Okay.
any good example for additive risk in real-time projects you have witnessed or you will like to highlight in construction activities?
So additive risk, personal experience. So I come from an area where there are way too many industries, right? So I come from the northern outskirts of Chennai. So technically, if there had been just one industry, I don't think we'll be having so much of an air pollution. The level of dust in air is just tremendous. And to add on to that, forget the factories, we also have this freight movement to the port through our area. So which means there is dust coming in from that also. So you might think these are from two different sources, but they are additive because both is like it's dust plus dust, giving you more dust, right? So I hope that that's
When
like
we are doing
yeah,
means when we are doing an environmental impact assessment or environment and social impact assessment study report,
mm,
then we have to consider not only the factors which are generating pollution or causing harm to environment from
yeah,
our project only. We
yeah.
have to assess that is it adding the already polluted or human interference by other factors also, and that should be quantified in the final report. Am I
Yes,
right, madam?
yes, sir, absolutely. So giving another example from my own area, because I'm very familiar with the place, we have something called a hot water beach. So we have a thermal power plant right next to where I live. What happens is there is this extremely hot water that is actually
Point that
let out in the sea. What happens is if it's just hot water, if you leave it out into the ocean, it's actually not that problematic, right? Because it's a huge water body and the impact will be less. But say there is some sort of chemical from the nearby fertilizer industry, and that industry, right now they're not doing it, but if they decide to put some sort of chemical into the water, again, if without this hot water, that chemical might not react with normal water, right? Then it's again fine. It's a huge ocean, it will get diluted. But hot water plus that chemical might end up being toxic. So that component, you might think, oh, my project is just the fertilizer industry. I don't care. No, if there is a some sort of hot water in that area, you will have to be cognizant. Oh, you know what? There is hot water, so I can't release it normally. Yeah, I have to look at it differently. I have to somehow dispose the hot water somewhere else, or the chemical somewhere, some other way, or manage to reduce the temperature of the hot water. If I'm the thermal power plant and I'm releasing hot water, I should reduce the temperature and then let it out. So these two aspects have to be taken. Otherwise, you don't have to worry so much about hot water if it's let into the ocean. That is, small water body will still get affected. Is that a decent
yeah.
example? Okay, sir. Okay, sir. Thank
Thank
you,
you,
sir.
thank you, madam.
Thank you,
Thank
sir.
you.
Okay, so this is the current assignment questions. You must have answered these recently as well. We'll just take a quick look at them so that the explanations are clear. So question number one, which options among the given options is a component of the monitoring and evaluation of resettlement action plan? So we have performance monitoring, impact monitoring, completion audit, and then B, all of the above. Okay. We have a couple of answers, and both of you are right. Excuse me, so sorry. So monitoring and evaluation plan components. So we have performance monitoring, impact monitoring, and completion audit, right? So question number four, because I think some of the questions have already been repeated, so, or addressed. State true or false. Indigenous people are one of the associated ESS or environmental and social standards as per uh, AIIB's ESP of 2021. So true or false. So we have one answer. Anybody else? All right. So the answer is true, and this was mentioned sort of in passing. So they are in fact one of the associated environmental and social standards. So these are standards that are set by the bank, right? So as part of their environmental and social policy. So different investment or lending banks or infrastructure banks especially, before they lend you a loan, they have a few criteria that you need to meet before which you can go ahead and you can get a loan from them. So they have one such standard about indigenous people. The next question. As per the life cycle assessment, resultant waste from the processes is considered under which impact category? Is it upstream impacts or B downstream impacts? We have a couple of answers. We have a few answers. Okay, so this is the slide dealing with upstream and downstream impacts. So we have for upstream impacts in life cycle assessment, we have where and how the original materials are produced, processed, and manufactured, how they are packed and transported, how they are used, right? Downstream impacts is where how resultant wastes are managed. Okay. So the answer is this is another slide that just talks about uh, life cycle, a typical product's life cycle. So in the downstream, you look at reuse, recycling, or some sort of waste management, right? So the answer is B, downstream impacts. Moving on to the next question. As per the Life Cycle Assessment Handbook, a guide for environmentally sustainable products, choose the correct option for the blue box to complete the general methodology framework for life cycle assessment or LCA. So what is this one? So we have goal and scope definition, inventory analysis, and then something. Then you have interpretation at each level, right? Any answers? Is it A, impact assessment, B, embodied energy calculation, C, operation energy calculation, D, greenhouse gas or GHG emission assessment? Okay, we have one answer. Anybody else? Okay, let's see the diagram. The diagram is actually a general methodological framework, right? So this is from the life cycle assessment handbook. So first you define goal and scope, then you do an inventory analysis, and then you do impact assessment. So they're looking at a very general framework. Technically, if you look at the answers that are given, embodied energy calculation can be impact assessment. Operation energy calculation can be impact assessment. GHG emission assessment is also impact assessment. So these are all actually different types of assessments, right? So how this is how you sort of assess how much impact is going to be there, or how much, like, in the course of a life cycle assessment. However, in this particular diagram, it's talking about a very, very broad framework. So here you see that it's given life cycle assessment framework. So it's a comprehensive framework. There they're not looking for specifics. They're just looking for the overall. So the answer is actually A, impact assessment.
What is GHG emission assessment, madam?
Greenhouse gas emission assessment. So how much greenhouse gas is going to be emitted at each stage in the life cycle of the product, in the production, in its waste handling, everything, or in even in its use for that matter. Is that does that answer your question, sir?
Thank you, madam. Thank you.
Yeah. Got it. Okay, sir. And you don't have to call me ma'am. So, so moving on to the next question. So, identify the most comprehensive framework for life cycle assessment amongst the following. So, we have four levels of life cycle assessment, which is the most comprehensive, right? So, A, cradle to gate, B, cradle to site, C, cradle to use, and D, cradle to grave. Any answers? Okay, we have a couple of answers. So let's see the slides pertaining to this. So this is the general life cycle flow diagram, right? So for any product, for anything, any particular object or an entity, you have raw materials acquisition, then the manufacturing, right? The materials are manufactured, and then from the materials, the products are manufactured, and then product use of consumption. So these are all the second and third stages are essentially different levels of manufacturing, and then you use or consume the product, and then there is waste coming out of it, and then disposal of that waste or some sort of reuse or recycle might also be involved, right? So when you look at what sort of assessment, whenever you take a product, we look at what is the implication of it. We what we call a footprint, right? So how much does it impact the environment? How much, how much is it affecting the environment? So when you look at that, you can assess the product's impact up to a certain stage. So whenever somebody declares, like a lot of agencies declared, oh, we are a very green product. We have reduced emissions. We need to look at how are they making this claim. For example, my favorite example to take would be the mud glasses that we get, or even paper straws. That's an easier example, right? When you have paper straws, people might think, oh, this is environment friendly because they think, oh, it can be disposed of easily. But what is going into the manufacturing? Are we doing more harm than good? Even in those mud, tea, chai cups, if there is some sort of a finish that is given, is that affecting the environment? Is it taking too much to manufacture? Is it taking essential topsoil and then doing this? All of these need to be considered. So when you're looking at any product, we have different levels till which we can assess, right? Cradle to gate is when, so gate as in, excuse me, the product, uh, when it is at the raw material supply, when the raw material is transported and then some sort of manufacturing, right? So we are talking about, say again, here when they say the product construction process stage, they essentially mean that taking it to the site part, right? So gate is when getting out of the industry. So that's what they mean by cradle to grade. Cradle as in starting point, right? And then gate as in getting out of the industry where it is being manufactured. Then cradle to site is when you take it to, it's going to be used in some site, right? Say it is going to come to your house. For example, an AC, say the AC is manufactured somewhere, and then it's being transported to your house, to the shop, and then to your house, and then it's installed there. So that will be your cradle to site. Right? Then cradle to use is when you start using the AC, there is some sort of maintenance, repair. You end up spending some energy, somebody has to come repair it, replacement, refurbishment, all of these could include some sort of use, right? And then after it's being used, how do you dispose it? Cradle to grave, right? So how do you manage this waste? That will be cradle to grave. So cradle to grave looks at all the aspects, right? In the name of life cycle assessment, a lot of agencies do a partial assessment. They just look at, need not be from cradle also. Like it could start from use to end of life stage. So yeah, so the answer is actually D, cradle to grave. That's the most comprehensive framework for life cycle assessment. If the question says which are the frameworks, all of them could actually be frameworks, right? So this is an example of an LCA, right? So you can see how the upstream where you get it from on sites and then downstream operations. It's just to give you an idea of where the gate lies, where the grave lies, where the cradle lies. A very basic representation. Right? Okay, moving on to the next question. Which among the following options is represented in a water balance diagram? So we were talking about water balance. Then which of the options will be represented? A. Water used for cooling tower. B. Solid waste generated on site. C. Plastics disposed of on the site. D. Noise generated during construction. Okay, we have a few answers, and all of you are right. The thing is, this is an example of a water balance figure for a pulp and paper mill, right? So when you when you talk about a water balance diagram or some sort of particular balance diagram, you specifically talk about only that aspect. So in a water balance diagram, you talk specifically about how is the water being handled, how much is the input, how much is the processing, what happens to it, the entire cycle of water within that project, right? So when you're talking about a water balance diagram, other things might be happening, right? In that particular project that you're talking about, there the other things might also be happening. But if you're drawing a water balance diagram, then only this will be mentioned, right? Water used for cooling tower. Moving on to the next question. State true or false. The risk management framework is a component of EIA. Is it true or false? Okay. We have one answer. Anybody else? Okay. We have a few answers, and all of you are right. So it's, if you remember from the slides also, ma'am, details about risk management framework. It is a component of EIA. Sorry. Question number 10. Which of the following is an example of a chronic hazard? A. Prolonged exposure to radioactive material. B. Risk of falling objects. C. Risk of accidental injury. D. Risk of a natural hazard such as a landslide. We have one answer. We have two answers, and both of you are right. So the keyword being prolonged exposure, right? All the others are acute hazards. Right? So if you remember, this is the slide that explains what a chronic hazard is. The answer is A. Moving on to the next question. Bhopal Union Carbide accident is an example of which kind of hazard? Is it a natural hazard, acute hazard, biological hazard, or ergonomic hazard? We have a few answers. So essentially, Bhopal Union Carbide accident, the Bhopal gas tragedy as we better know it, is actually a hazardous event, if you remember, right? So when you look at a chronic hazard being like slow exposure, this is a sudden event, right? So the answer is actually B, acute hazard. An ergonomic hazard, technically, I don't. It's not a large scale hazard. It's more of an individual hazard, right? Ergonomics is the study of human postures, right? So this is when ma'am mentions this event, right? It is an acute hazard. I know the term acute is not specifically used in the whole, you know, classification of hazard, but it is an acute hazard. Okay, so there is, if you claim that it is human negligence, it might be, but it's still uh, that's that's not the classification we are looking for, right? One second, I'll check if this is even a thing. Just give me a minute. Yeah, so I just checked. Ergonomic hazard is the individual being affected. Say you're sitting in a wrong posture, or some sort of carpal tunnel syndrome where because you're using your phone too much. So these are like personal issues, right? So this is not at the scale of a gas tragedy, right? Maybe if there was an option for a man-made hazard, which includes human negligence, then we have two answers that are right. Is that is there a query regarding this?
Just want to ask it because it is a hazard by some few people, so it is will not considered into ergonomic because ergonomic
Yes,
means ergonomics measurements. Why supposingly we have a small door or small opening, so everybody has to bend his head and then go through it. So
yes,
it will create either injury on the head or it will create some bending problem in the neck. So
yes,
that is
yes,
ergonomic and yes, okay.
yes, sir.
Thank you, ma'am.
I
Thank
mean,
you.
even in a bigger context, I'll give you, say somebody develops an occupational hazard, right? Somebody has to lift heavy weights all the time, or they're, something that will affect your musculoskeletal system like that. So this person or somebody is continuously bending. Say, imagine this person is bending and working for 6 hours a day, 8 hours a day. Like the posture is so awkward that the human their their health is going to be affected. That's an ergonomic hazard. But why if the term that is used for negligence of human uh, you know uh, human negligence resulting in an accident would be a man-made disaster or a man-made hazard, right? So if you end up, say, leaving the operation of a nuclear plant to without any checks and balances, if there is no checks and balances, if there are not multiple people, then a failure in that case would be a huge disaster. Which is why we have several safety protocols. I hope that clears it. Moving on to the next question. Okay, okay, sir. Okay. Yeah. So then, in the context of EIA, CIA stands for what? A. Cumulative impact assessment. B. Cumulative industrial assessment. C. Comparative indicator assessment. And D. Central investigation agency. Any answers? We have one answer. Anybody else? Okay. We have a couple of answers, and the answer is you're both right. The answer is A. So it's cumulative impact assessment. Right? So we can also call it CEA, where it is called cumulative effects assessment, or CAM, cumulative effects assessment and management. The answer is A. Moving on to the next question. Okay, so again, Google Meet has crashed on my phone, so I can't see your answers. I'll have to check on the screen. Sorry about that. So, yeah, arrange the following methodological steps in their correct order as per CEA, cumulative effects assessment. Where we have prediction and evaluation, scoping and baseline, and mitigation. What is the correct order of things? Any answers? Okay, we have one answer. Anybody else? All right, let's see what the answer is since we're running out of time. So, this is something that, I mean, from the onset itself, from the coverage itself, you can see the overall methodology sort of gives this scoping and baseline, then prediction and evaluation and mitigation, right? So even in the overall methodology, you can see that this scheme of things sort of keeps repeating. So the answer is in fact C. Okay. Moving on to the next question. Match the definitions from group B with their correct headings from group A. So we have cumulative effects, additive effects, and synergistic effects. So we saw additive effects and synergistic effects earlier, right? So some of the magnitudes of the same effect would be additive effects. Combination of different effects would be synergistic effects. That leaves us with three effects arising from the successful, incremental, and/or combined effects of an action is cumulative effects. Right? So these are the slides that are dealing with these terms. So the answer is C. I rushed through because these two have already been explained earlier in the. So I think this is the last question for the evening. Match the legislation from Group A with the countries of origin from Group B. So we have three legislations. Let me go the other way. So we have National Environmental Management Act, then Environmental Protection Act of 1986, and Environmental Impact Assessment Ordinance. Any answers? Okay, I've received one answer. Okay, let's see what the answer is. So ours is Environmental Protection Act. So this one, 1986, is India's. Okay. So Hong Kong uses this ordinance, Environmental Impact Assessment Ordinance, right? And then National Environmental Management Act is actually South Africa's. So it'll be P3, Q1, and R2. So the answer, this is the slide that gives you select examples of related legislation. The answer is C, and you are right, sir. So yeah. So that brings us to the end of the session. Uh, Repeating some of the things that I had said at the beginning of the session. One, we'll have only multiple choice questions for the examination. You don't have to, I mean, there might be a fill in the blank, but fill in the blank, you four options will be given, right? The format of the questions will essentially be the same as whatever we've had till now in these sessions. So you don't have to worry about that. Right? There were a few queries last time also. That's why I'm mentioning this. I guess the hall tickets have not been issued yet. I hopefully they'll be issued shortly. Um, that's not in our hands. The NPTEL team has to do it. It's not something that the course team does. Similarly, the corrections in the assignments, I see a lot of queries coming up in the discussion forum also. All those queries, the corrections will be posted, will be made. The changes will be made and the marks will be modified accordingly. So you don't have to worry about that either. Yeah, so I think that's all for the evening. If there are no other queries, we'll be done for the day. We've already exceeded time, as I see. I'm sorry about that. All right, then you can post your queries in the discussion forum. You can particularly mention my name or raise a query so that I can respond. So otherwise, I think I've addressed almost all the queries that have been there in the discussion forum. I've addressed them here in the live sessions. Hopefully, they'll be useful. The explanations will be useful for you to remember the answers. Thank you, one and all, for attending. I'll see you next week. Thank you.